Basin PBS presents the Midland Storytelling Festival from the Anwar Family Studio.
Good evening, and welcome to the 29th Annual Midland Storytelling Festival. I'm Annalon Gilbert, and I'll be your host for this evening of stories. While you're gathering around to watch and listen, why not call a friend and tell them the Storytelling Festival is on Basin PBS. And even though we're distant in some ways, we'll all be close as we have this shared experience. Tonight's lineup reads like a who's who list among the top storytellers in the nation. We're all in for a treat. The Midland Storytelling Festival has been in existence since 1992. Who would have dreamed that 29 years later we'd still be here telling stories, sharing memories, and inspiring all who love stories? Our first teller this evening is Barbara McBride Smith. Now, I wouldn't exactly call Barbara a good old girl gone wrong, but after all, she was born in Waco, Texas. Then she went and lived in places like Massachusetts and Oklahoma. Nothing wrong with those places at all, but she left Texas. Now she resides in Jonesboro, Tennessee. We have to cut her some slack on that one, though, because it is the hometown of storytelling. Barbara tells a broad range of traditional stories, Greek myths, and biblical stories with her own unique twist. She also has a repertoire of lovely family stories that are warm and rich. She says she gets her storytelling skills from her parents, who told stories as she grew up, and from her two deaf sisters who communicated quite effectively with body language. She has been a teacher, a school library media specialist, a theological seminary professor, a writer, a storyteller, and has recorded several CDs. She performs widely over the United States and is a regular teller at the National Storytelling Festival. We're always delighted to welcome back Barbara McBride Smith.
When I was in second grade, I realized that I was a princess, and I had proof. You see, I slept on a feather bed. Now, this makes sense when you know that earlier that year, my second grade teacher, Mrs. C, had read a story to us called The Princess and the Pea. Now, if you know that story, you may remember that there is this princess who shows up at a castle, and she claims that she's a princess, but nobody believes her. She has to prove it. And to do that, she has to sleep on a feather bed. Not just one feather mattress, but a whole stack of them, about 20 feather mattresses all stacked up to make this bed. And underneath it, the queen put this little tiny green pea. And the test was this: if the princess could feel that little tiny green pea through all those feather mattresses, that meant she was a real princess. Well, I slept on a feather bed. And when I would wake up in the morning, I would be black and blue all over. I was just convinced that I could feel a tiny green pea or maybe a bunch of dead ducks that were inside that mattress coming through to my delicate little skin. Well, I hated that mattress. I wanted to get rid of it. I kept saying to my mama, "I need a new mattress." And my mama would say to me, "Girl, there is nothing wrong with that mattress that a good airing out won't cure." I just hated it when my mama said that. I knew what it meant to air out a mattress. We did that almost every spring with the mattresses in our house. She loved that old feather bed I slept on because, you see, it had belonged to her mama. My grandmother had slept on that thing for, 50 years. And then when she died, that mattress got passed down in the family. Back in those days, I think people kept mattresses for 100 years. Well, my mama would have loved to have slept on that mattress, but my mama was a substantially built woman. So was my dad. And the two of them together took up a good chunk of real estate on a mattress. They wouldn't fit on that feather bed. And since I was the youngest one in the family, I ended up with it. Well, sure enough, the next Monday, it was a bright, sunny day in the middle of May. My mama woke me up a few minutes early. She said, "Now get dressed, eat your breakfast, because we're going to carry that mattress outside and air it out today." Sure enough, we finished eating, and my dad grabbed one corner of the mattress, Mama grabbed another, and I grabbed the third, and we dragged that mattress outside. We put it up on sawhorses that my dad had put right next to his garden. See, my dad grew a garden every single spring, and that's where most of our vegetables came from. Well, he kept expanding his garden every year. He would dig out another piece of ground. He'd take all of the grass up, and he'd dig out the old dirt, and he'd put in some good fresh dirt and some compost. And that garden would just get a little bit bigger. And pretty soon he wasn't going to have to mow the grass anymore because there wouldn't be any left. And he was real happy about that idea because he hated mowing the grass. Well, that's where he put the sawhorses, right next to that dug-out chunk in the ground. It was a hole that was, maybe about 2 feet wide, maybe about 4 feet long. It went down, probably 18 inches. We set up the mattress up on the sawhorses, and my mama had to hurry off to work. My dad and I were standing there looking at that mattress, and I said, "Hey, Daddy, I got an idea. How about you and me, we'll just drag this mattress over there to the alley, and when the trash truck comes along to pick up the garbage today, it can just pick up that mattress and carry it off, and I can get a brand new mattress." My dad shook his head. He said, "No can do, Kimosabe. That mattress, it's between you and your mama. It's not between you and me." I purely hated it when my daddy didn't take my side on a disagreement. Well, he got in his pickup truck. He went on off to work. I went to school. I walked about 6 blocks. Well, after lunch that day, we went outside for recess, and I looked up at the sky, and I saw that beautiful sunny day in May had changed to a cloudy day. These big, heavy clouds had rolled in. I thought, it looks like it could rain. I started thinking about that old feather bed lying outside, and I smiled. I thought, yeah, who cares? Well, school was out. I was walking home about 3:30. And when I got to the house, I put my books down and my lunchbox down, and I went out into the backyard. I looked down at the mattress, and I looked up at the sky. Now it was really dark. And the sky had taken on this kind of a strange green color. My dad had always told me that if the sky was green, it meant that some really rough weather could be coming. He said it was often the sign of ice in the clouds, which would mean a hailstorm, and maybe even worse than that. So I looked down at that mattress again, and I thought maybe I should try to grab it and drag it back in the house, but I knew I wasn't strong enough. So I said, "You're on your own. Sink or swim." It looked like a beach whale lying there. I didn't care if it drowned. So I started back toward the house, and that was when I heard a sound in the driveway. It sounded like my dad's pickup truck. But it was just a little before 4 o'clock. He shouldn't be home this early. But all of a sudden, there he was. His truck came to a screeching halt, and he jumped out of the cab, and he came running toward me, and he said, Listen, baby, I was just been listening to the radio at work, and I heard this report. It's a weather report that there is a tornado. It's been spotted out on the outskirts of Waco. It's coming this way, they think. And so we're going to have to take cover. Well, I grabbed a hold of the handle on the back door. I was about to open it. My dad said, no, it's safer out here. Safer? Outside? In a tornado? Yep, my dad said, I know what to do. Now come on, you grab a hold in one corner of this mattress, I'll grab the other. We're going to drag it over there to that hole, and we're going to lay it right on top of that hole. And you're going to get down inside that hole. Well, we grabbed the mattress, we pulled it over there. I climbed down inside that hole. I said, Daddy, are you getting in here with me? And he said, no, there's not enough room for both of us. But he said, now you stay down there. I'm going to pull this mattress over the top of you. And then I'm going to spread eagle myself on top of this mattress. And I'm going to hold it down. Well, I was terrified. I was shaking all over. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it. But I got down in that hole the way my dad said. It was so dark in there. I cried out, Daddy, I'm scared. And then I heard my dad, he was scooting that mattress back a little bit. He pulled it back just enough that there was just a little crack of an opening. And I could see a little bit of daylight coming through. And then my dad put his hand down through that opening. And he said, now you grab hold of my hand. And you hang on. And I'm going to hang on to you real tight. I'm not going to let go. Unless I have to. And if you feel my hand slipping out of yours, well, you just let it go. Because it means I've sprouted wings. And I'm taking a little flight. Well, sure enough, I grabbed my dad's hand, and no sooner did that happen than the rain began to come down. It was pouring. It poured like that for a good 5 minutes, and then when the rain slacked off, that was when the hail came. I could see out through that little opening balls of hail. They were as big as golf balls. I knew my dad was getting hit on his back and on his head by that hail. Every now and then he would yell out a swear word. And I thought to myself, my mama's not going to like it when I tell her about this. And then the hail stopped and the wind came. It was the most ferocious wind I had ever heard in my life. You've probably heard people say that when a tornado goes over, it sounds like a freight train. That's exactly how it sounded. It roared. It seemed like an hour, but it was probably 5 minutes. And then it was finally over. My dad pulled that mattress off of that hole, and he stuck his hand down toward me. I grabbed his hand again, and then he just pulled me up out of that hole. I just kind of walked right up his leg, and I seated myself on his shoulders. I was a pretty big kid to be sitting on my dad's shoulders, but it felt like the safest place to be. My daddy said, "Baby girl, we just done rode a tornado and lived to tell about it." And it was true. That tornado that tore through my hometown, Waco, Texas, on May 11th, 1953, is still on record as one of the deadliest and most destructive tornadoes ever to hit in the United States. They didn't use a Fujita scale back in those days to measure tornadoes, but by today's standards, it would be a 5 on that scale, the worst kind of tornado. We looked around at our yard, at our house. Part of our roof was gone. It had been thrown all over the neighbor's yard. My favorite tree in the backyard, a chinaberry tree, it had been split right down the middle. Half of it had fallen across the back of the house and half of it had fallen over the garage. All of my dad's new little green vegetables in his garden had been ripped up and were thrown all over the yard. My dad's pickup truck in the driveway, it had been picked up and turned sideways. And that old feather bed of mine, it was a goner. I said to my dad, "You know, Daddy, you were right about a lot of things, but you were wrong about one thing." "Yeah, what's that?" "That mattress, it was between you and me, and I'm mighty glad that it was." We were among the lucky ones that day in my hometown. Many people lost their homes, their businesses, and their lives. But we survived the tornado of 1953, thanks to my dad. Well, I got a brand new mattress. It was the best mattress in the house. And I knew then that I really was a princess. Not because I slept on any particular kind of mattress, but because I had my very own knight in shining armor, my dad.
Ah, the memories that story stirred up. I know you enjoyed that. Antonio Rocha comes to us from Brazil by way of Gray, Maine. He came to America to study the art of mime with a master, Tony Montanaro. Later, he studied with the respected Marcel Marceau. When Antonio discovered storytelling, he realized he could blend oral telling with mime, bringing the two together in a powerful form of communication. He is elegant, graceful, and dramatic with just a touch of magic. He has widely traveled in the United States as well as 15 other countries, spanning 6 continents. He has appeared in numerous times at the National Storytelling Festival as well as the Kennedy Center, Wolf Trap, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Singapore Festival of the Arts, just to mention a few. He also has a degree in theater from the University of Maine. Prepare to be enchanted. Welcome, Antonio Rocha.
Hello everybody, my name is Antonio Rocha and I'm very excited to tell you this story. All right, a long time ago in a village far, far away from here, this village was cute. And all the houses looked the same, they're all like this, thatched roofs, cobblestone streets, and there was a big thick wall around the whole village, There was a big, thick wall around the whole village with a massive gate. And the gate would open and farmers would come from the countryside with their produce to sell in the farmer's market. And travelers would come in and travelers would go. Kids played outside all the time. This is a long time ago. This is before this. This is before even television, And the games that kids played, they played outside. They played hide and go seek outside. They climbed trees. They built swings. They built fortresses. They dug holes all the way to China. And some made it there. Yeah. And kids played so much. They would make dolls out of rags. They would get an old bicycle and tire and push it around town. There's so much to do outside. Kids played inside. Rarely played inside. And kids came inside actually only to eat, do homework, and go to bed. There's nothing really to do inside for kids except eat, go to bed, and do some homework. And so kids played outside all the time. Ask your grandparents about it. Ask even your parents. Some of your parents probably live like that. Yeah, kids were always outside. I think I said that enough. Yeah, I said that enough. The windows back in those days, check this out. They wouldn't slide up. They wouldn't slide down. It's not because they were broken. It's because they swing out. Yeah, the cute little windows, they would swing out, and you would then have, if it was springtime, you'd have a flower bed right there on your windowsill, and the perfume of those flowers would come into your room, and that was the beginning of a good day. Oh, yes. And so they were there one day playing outside, making things, and playing with their toys, when all of a sudden they felt the ground shake a little bit. It was like a vibration at first. It was no earthquake, because it had a rhythm to it. You'd shake and stop, shake and stop, shake and stop, shake and stop, just like that. And at first they didn't even notice it. And then one of the kids felt, vibrate a little more, like shake some more. And did you notice that? Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, that's very strange. And then it happened again, and it kept happening. Shake and stop, shake and stop, shake and stop, shake and stop, shake and stop. And so they went home to ask their parents what was going on, because they didn't know what it was. It was no earthquake. Earthquakes don't have a rhythm like that. Shake and stop, shake and stop. No. And when they got home, their parents were just staring at the things on the shelves that were moving, shaking and stopping, shaking and stopping. And now they were moving more and falling off the shelves and breaking against the floors. And that's when the parents grabbed the kids by the hands and they took them to the village square. Because at the village square, it was a place to go to farmers market day, but it was also a place where the villagers gathered for festivities, for holidays, to commemorate things, but also to discuss important matters. And this was a very important thing that was going on. Nobody could figure out why the ground was shaking and stopping, shaking and stopping. And now it was even more, it was progressively increasing. Everything was shaking. The people were shaking, shaking and stopping, shaking and stopping. And one of the villagers said, "Do not open the gate, keep it closed. I have a feeling it's coming from out there." And another one said, "I'll bring a ladder." And he disappeared and came back with a very tall ladder and placed it against the wall. And he started to climb that ladder. He was climbing the ladder. "All right, when I get to the top, I'll take a look. Out there, I have a feeling something is coming from out there as well. So let me get to the very top and I'll tell you all what I see." And he got to the very top. And he got off the ladder, and what he saw coming towards the village turned his face pale as a ghost. He whipped his hair around, and he looked at the villagers who were out there holding on to one another as the ground was shaking and stopping, shaking and stopping. And this gentleman looked down and said, "There is a... What is it? Come on, tell us. What do you see? There is a... What is it? What is it? What do you see? There is Are you going to sneeze or something? No, there is a giant. A giant is coming!" That was the village alarm. And when people heard that there was a giant coming, boys and girls, the grown-ups grabbed the kids and they ran home as fast as they could. Some of the kids could not even keep up with the grown-ups. They went, the little ones, the toddlers, went flying like this. And when they got home, they opened the doors and they threw the kids inside. "Get in there, get in there, get out of the road, get out of the street, get in there." And the kids were bouncing off the walls. No, they're not bouncing off the walls. They were gently pushed inside their homes, and the doors were shut, the windows were closed, and for the first time, nobody was outside, just that giant coming. Oh, people had not even seen the giant. Only one had seen very quickly. The giant was still kind of far away when that villager saw the giant coming. But most of the people all the other people had not seen the giant. And this giant was coming. This giant was coming The giant was coming, and people had made all these assumptions of how the giant looked. Some said his hair was wild, like a storm, like a raging storm. Others said his eyebrows went round and round and round and round. Some said that his eye sockets were so deep you couldn't see his eyeballs in there. They're dark in there, dark. So others said that his nose was all twisted and bumpy with long hair sticking out and boogers dangling from them. Woo-wee. Others said that his beard was so big and it's stuffed with leftover rotten food, because he would stuff his mouth. Every time he ate, he would stuff his mouth like that, and rotten food would fall in there and stay in there and stink in there. Others said that his chest was so big and hairy of a chest that you needed a flashlight to walk in there. And that is if you have the courage to do so. You need a flashlight to walk in there. Others said that his belly button was this big around, and 2 hairy spiders lived in there. Yeah, 2 hairy spiders lived in his belly button. And when the giant was asleep after taking a nap from eating a lot, he would eat and eat and eat, and then he would get lazy, after eating so much, he'd fall asleep, and there would be food on his lips and food in his beard, and the spiders would come out like that. The spiders would come out and go over to his face and start eating the leftovers stuck to his lips and in his beard, and then John would kind of brush them away, and they would scurry back into his belly button like that. Some said that his thighs looked like Pacific Northwest red trees. And his feet, his feet, boys and girls, his feet smell like, this is as close as I've gotten to describe how bad the giant's feet smelled. Just picture this. Somebody in your family buys fresh fish in the market, puts it in the trunk of a car, in the trunk of the car, and then drives home, then he forgets that they got the fish in the market. And then the fish sits there, and he sits there, and he sits there, and about 3 days later, they open the trunk. That's how bad people said the giant's feet smelled. And the giant was coming, kaboom, 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 kaboom. When all of a sudden they all heard it. They heard the gigantic, rusted, old hinges that held that gate. They heard the familiar sound they made every time you opened or closed the gate. Oh no, somebody was opening the gate. Was it the giant? No, it was not the giant, because the giant was still coming. People could feel the ground shaking and stopping, shaking and stopping. Somebody else was opening the gate. And the people who lived near the gate, they mustered up some courage to get to the window. They could see the gate from the window, but they had drawn their curtains. They were so afraid of the giant, So they had drawn some curtains, and there's these tiny little window panes, in some of the windows, and they got there, and they moved the curtains, and they saw who had opened the gate. And all the people who lived near the gate, they could see. It looked like a boy. It looked like a boy this tall. Yeah. But some said it looked like a girl this tall. You know how people remember things? Some people remember it was a boy. Some people remember it was a girl. It was definitely a kid. It was a kid that had opened the gate. I'm a storyteller, as you know. So instead of saying it was a boy or girl, I don't want to, disappoint people. But everybody knows it was a kid. They know for sure it was a kid. So, kid had opened the gate, and the kid was standing there at the gate, looking at the giant just like this. And the giant was coming. And now guess what the kid decided to do? The kid started to go towards the giant. The giant was coming. The kid was going. The giant was coming. The kid was going towards the giant. The giant was coming. The kid was going. The giant was coming. The kid was going. When all of a sudden something extraordinary started to happen. The closer the kid got to the giant, the smaller the giant looked. I don't know how. Maybe you'll figure out by the time I'm done telling the story. But the closer the kid got to the giant, the smaller the giant grew. And by the time the kid got to where the giant was, guess how big this giant was? The giant had gotten this big. The giant was right there on the ground. And guess what the kid did? No, the kid didn't kick the giant. No, you don't do that. You don't just kick strangers. That's not nice. No, the kid didn't step on the giant. Who said that? No, the kid didn't step on the giant. No. You know what the kid did? The kid picked up the giant ever so gently. Like that. Yeah. Whew, your feet smell terrible. But don't worry, mine are worse when I don't change my socks. Yeah, mine are way worse. Yeah. And it looks like you have a terrible cold. I'm very sorry. It looks like you've been traveling for a long time. Hey, what's your name? My name is Fear. F-E-A-R. And there is the giant's name, Fear. So I'd love for you to talk with the grown-ups in your household and figure out now. You have enough information to figure out why that giant shrunk to that kid. Thank you for listening.
Antonio definitely gave us something to think and talk about. If you're speaking of being fearless, Laura Pershing Rayner might come to mind. Laura is from Ann Arbor, Michigan. She is recently retired as a librarian where weekly she would hold children enraptured by her storytelling techniques. Using all kinds of old-fashioned toys and other doodads, she enthusiastically told tales and tells tales now to children who respond with delight to her charm. Adults, too, find delight in the pictures she paints of family, of dinners and get-togethers. You know, Laura, I have always wanted to attend one of those family dinners. Her relatives are a marvelous group, each one worthy of at least one good story, and she tells of them with love and tenderness. Laura is from a background awash with stories. Her grandma Dinah raised her on stories from the old country, providing Laura a colorful tapestry from which to craft her own stories. Laura has been a teller in residence at Jonesboro, Tennessee, and has received the Award of Merit for Children's Librarian of the Year in Michigan. Here she is, Laura Pershing Rayner.
Hello. I'm sitting on my stairway here to tell you a story. I find myself on the stairway more than you would imagine. Sometimes to pull on my boots on a cold winter day, or I'm checking through the mail, or even in the middle of a great book, I'll all of a sudden look up and here I am, because I find it to be a cozy place. And cozy is a perfect place to start a story about my Grandma Fanny. My Grandma Fanny was a tiny woman, and she lived in a tiny house. I always thought that her backyard looked like a green from putt-putt miniature golf. And the flowers that she planted along the front walk looked like teeny white snowballs to me. My Grandpa Julius was a very tall man, and he looked like a giant standing in the doorway of their house whenever my family came to visit. I loved my Grandma Fanny's house. There were so many wonderful things to love. The way the walls themselves seemed to smell like chicken soup with matzo balls. The big glass jar of bazooka bubblegum that Grandma Fanny kept in the lower cupboard just for her grandchildren. The brown, cracked leather chair where I sat on Grandpa Julius's lap to watch ugly wrestlers on Saturday afternoon TV. He'd bounce me on his lap and say, "Go, Crusher! Oh, look at that gigantic haystack Calhoun. Oh, he's so big, I wouldn't want to mess with him in a dark alley." And I loved the wicker basket. Like a big bowl of fruit, it sat right at the edge of Grandma Fanny's bed in the afternoons, filled with round balls of yarn in every color of the rainbow to make the afghans, the big knitted or crocheted afghans, to keep my Grandma Fanny's family warm long after she was gone. One day, Grandma was sitting with that bowl of yarn right at her feet, waiting for her poppy seed cookies to get done baking. So she was in the kitchen and she was knitting one of her afghans. And I plopped on the kitchen floor in front of her and I said, "Grandma, how do you do it?" And she said, "Do what, Bubala?" How do you know how to put the flowers or the stars or the squares or triangles or whatever you're making together so that all the colors look so pretty? And Grandma Fanny said, "I don't know. I guess I just think about things." "What kind of things do you think about, Grandma?" "Well," she said, and she reached into that basket and she pulled out a big ball of red yarn. She said, "You see this red? This is the color of the apples we pick every autumn in the apple orchard for my famous Fanny's apple cake. And this one, this blue, this is the color of my sister Rosie's hair when she puts in a little too much of that cream rinse. And this bright green, this is the color of my Billy Boy's wings." I said, "Oh, I get it now, Grandma. Let me try." And I picked up a purple speckled ball of yarn. "This is the color of the Jawbreakers at Pesky's candy store. And this hot pink, this is the color of my Barbie's bikini with matching flip-flops and transistor radio." My grandma laughed and she said, "Now you get it. Now go feed Billy Boy." Billy Boy was another favorite at Grandma Fanny's house. Billy Boy was a parakeet, and he lived in a pink metal cage that sat right next to Grandma Fanny's china cabinet. Billy Boy was taught to say his own name. So sometimes he would fluff his feathers up and bang around the cage a bit and say, "Billy Boy, Billy Boy," until my Grandpa Julius had to yell, "Billy Boy, stop hawking me a chinik," which meant stop rattling the teacups. And Billy Boy looked down at me that day when I went to feed him, and he fluffed up his feathers and he said, "Billy Boy, Billy Boy." Now, the interesting thing about Billy Boy is that by the time I was 10 years old, there had been at least 4 Billy Boys. Whenever a Billy Boy passed on because of old age or illness, a couple days later, there'd be a new Billy Boy in the cage. Sometimes Billy Boy was the color of a bright blue sky. But the year that I was 10, he was the color of new spring grass. And that was the year that everyone crowded into Grandma and Grandpa's very small living room to celebrate the holiday of Passover. We had a Seder. And of course, there were many tables crowded into that room. There was the elder table where Grandma Fanny, Grandpa Julius, and all the great aunts and uncles sat. Then right next to it was the grown-up table where my parents and my aunts and uncles sat. And then the best table of all, you know what it is, the kids' table, where we had about 4 card tables squished together with different tablecloths. And I always made sure to sit next to my cousin Mark. I loved my cousin Mark. First of all, he was the best artist I had ever met. Whenever we were waiting for Seder to begin or a birthday party to be celebrated, no matter what the occasion, we had a tradition, the cousins and I, where we all lay on our bellies in the little den and we pull out the big tin of Crayola crayons and we would draw horses. Now, most of us drew horses standing perfectly still with little stick legs and a square red barn somewhere in the picture and maybe one of those corner suns. But Mark drew horses galloping across an open plain with their manes flying behind them and their eyes wild. Oh, he was wonderful. I also sat next to Mark because he didn't like to eat too much, and I did. Well, while we were sitting there waiting for the Seder to get over, which took forever, we were getting hungry, and the first course in the Passover meal was gefilte fish. Imagine a fresh carp, a fish, ground and a little bit of breadcrumb and seasoning in a ball on a plate with a little bit of gel over the top and a carrot right at the very top, like a cherry on a sundae. So when the gefilte fish was served, Mark pushed his towards me and said, "You want my disgusting jellyfish ball?" I said, "Of course." And just to impress Mark, I said, "I guess it takes adult taste to appreciate such a delicacy." Well, after dinner, all the grown-ups decided to take their chairs out to Grandma Fanny's carport, where she had strung colorful little lanterns to make it look festive. It was a beautiful spring evening, and everyone was so happy to be able to be outside after a long winter. So the grown-ups were sitting in the carport, kibitzing and telling stories. And Mark took my hand and he said, "Let's go say hi to Billy Boy." So we walked up to the pink metal cage and we looked in, and Billy Boy did what he always did, that bird head thing, and he fluffed up his feathers and he said, "Billy Boy!" And Mark said, "You know, it's funny, Laura, but Billy Boy's a bird. I've never seen him fly. I wonder if he can fly." And because I loved my cousin Mark, I broke the one rule in Grandma Fanny's house. I said, "Well, let's see." And I opened up the cage door. Well, at first the bird didn't know what to do. He kept staring down at us. But then he started to fluff up his feathers a bit. And then he started to bang against the side of the cage. And then he flew out, round and round near the ceiling of the dining room, out into the living room, back towards me. And he grabbed on to my bottom lip. And he hung there, with his sharp little beak. And I let out a and Mark grabbed onto me because he saw that Billy Boy wasn't going to let go. His wings were just flapping there, and he dragged me through the crowded living room with all the tables out to the carport where the grown-ups had gathered. And when my Grandpa Julius saw me standing there with Billy Boy flapping at my lip, he jumped up, he lifted me in the air. He was just about to grab the bird when Billy Boy took off. He flew about the carport 2 times and then out into the twilight night. And the whole family was running behind him. Well, we stood there, all of us on the street, watching Billy Boy disappear. And Mark took my hand and he said, I wonder where he's going. I said, I don't know, but I'm sure he'll be back tomorrow. But a couple days later, there was a new blue Billy Boy in the cage. But Mark made a fantastic drawing on extra big paper with every color he could find in the Crayola tin. It was a picture from behind of our family, all different heights, tiny Grandma Fanny at one end, big Grandpa Julius at the other. And we're looking up at a starlit sky, and there at the edge is a bright green Billy Boy flying off over the streets of Detroit as free as a bird. I kept that picture forever. Decades went by. And then one day I told this very same story at the library in Ann Arbor, where I worked. And Jody, who was somebody who had come to Storytime over the years with all of her children, came up to me afterwards and she looked kind of funny. She said, Laura, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, sure. And I found us a quiet place and she said, have a seat. She said, there's a story in my family and I want to check something with you. How old were you? What year was that when Billy Boy disappeared? And I said, well, I was 10, so it was 1963. And she said, that's what I thought. She said, there's a story in my family about a spring morning when my grandmother walked out to the front lawn to get her newspaper. And she picked it up and she heard something in the garage. The garage door was still open after her husband had driven to work. And there, on an old bicycle handle, was a little green parakeet. And it looked at her and it said, Billy Boy! And she was so astonished. She loved birds. She had had birds before. She even had a bird cage in her very own basement, which she brought up. She placed it near the bicycle, and Billy Boy flew in and lived with her happily for many years. And when he passed on, she got another Billy Boy. I said, Jody, this is the best end to my Billy Boy story ever. The tradition carries on. The tradition of the endless Billy Boys.
Weren't you just able to see Billy Boy? Well, as fate would have it, we have our own Billy Boy. Bill Lepp is from Charleston, West Virginia. Bill is difficult to describe. Let me give you just a little clue. He won his state's Liars Contest 5 times. Bill tells tall tales. Say that 7 times real fast. I really think that the tall should be in all capital letters. He comes by this talent naturally. As one source puts it, he comes from a family where the truth is fluid. The Smithsonian Center for Folklife puts it simply, calling Bill Lepp a side-splittingly funny man. His ability to find humor in almost any situation has won him many awards, including the National Storytelling Network Circle of Excellence Award. He performs regularly at the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. We are happy to have him return to the Midland Storytelling Festival. Here is Bill Lepp.
I have a dog, and my dog's name is Buck. But Buck ain't no ordinary dog. What you have to understand about Buck is that his mother was a German Shepherd, but his father was a prolific and extremely determined Basset Hound. But while Buck inherited his mother's good looks, he got his daddy's legs in the bargain. So he looks just like a German Shepherd that swallowed a Ford Fairlane. He's about a dog and a half long, but he's only about a half a dog tall. But what that dog lacks in good looks, he makes up for in nasal prowess. When it comes to smelling things, that dog is sort of a canine savant. I can hold down the plate of eggs I had for breakfast, that dog will run out to the hen house and find me the chicken that laid those eggs. One time I let him smell one of those spicy chicken wings. Half an hour later, he was back in my living room with a bottle of Tabasco and a buffalo. You've probably heard that fairy tale about the princess that sleeps on the 12 mattresses, and she finds the one with the P on it. Well, that's nothing. I guarantee you that even if you had 12,000 mattresses, it would take Buck less than a minute to find the one with the princess's P on it. And that's a vegetable joke in case you were offended. So I knew, with a nose like that, that dog was bound to be the greatest hunting dog that ever lived. And the only thing keeping Buck from being a great hunting dog was the fact that he was gun shy. Every time a gun would go off, he'd run and hide somewhere. So I knew I had to cure him of that. First, I tried all sorts of passive ways. He and I would sit up all night long reading Field and Stream articles to each other. Then we'd fall asleep watching hunting videos on the VCR. But none of that was working. So I decided I was going to have to take more drastic measures. And here's what I'd done. Now this would have been April, about 10 years ago. We were thick in the middle of a cold spell. It was 14 degrees outside. I had the day off work. Buck Dog was sound asleep in front of the fireplace. I took a piece of cardboard, drew a target on it, and I laid that on the compost pile in the backyard. I went inside, got my trusty 30-30 rifle and one bullet. I woke up Buck Dog, and I took a rope. I tied one end to his collar, the other end to my belt loop. We went outside. I held that bullet down there where Buck Dog could see it. He looked it over, sniffed a couple of times, and then he gave me a nod. Well, I loaded that bullet up in my rifle, took aim on that target, and blammo, I fired. Well, as per usual, I had failed to consider the full ramifications of my actions. And I can't tell you exactly what Buck was thinking, but as near as I can figure, he thought he was supposed to chase that bullet. Because no sooner did that bullet leave the end of my gun than Buck Dog was after it. And I don't mean he was running after it, I mean he was flying after it, chasing that bullet through thin air. And when he got to the end of that rope tied from his collar to my belt loop, that rope snapped tight, pulled me out of my boots, I dropped my rifle, and I was flying right behind him. Well, Buck Dog chased that bullet right through the hole in the middle of that piece of cardboard. Then he drugged me head first through that pile of compost. Now, I don't know if you know what it feels like to be drugged head first through a pile of compost. Well, wait a minute. You've been living in the same world I have since March. I think you know what that feels like. But that bullet left that compost pile, went flying off into the woods. And every time it ricocheted off a rock or glanced off a tree, Buck Dog was there. As we were going through the woods, a big old branch reached out and just tore my shirt and jacket right off me. Well, Buck Dog followed that bullet all the way down to the railroad tracks. Now that would be Weirton's world-famous steel fashioned into CS&X railroad tracks, running clear from Cowan to Grafton via Burnsville, Buchanan, Carrollton, and Philippi. And it just so happened that at that very moment, a 6-engine, 168-car CS&X monster train, loaded down with 19,364 tons of pure West Virginia bituminous coal, was rolling by. And that bullet slammed right into the side of one of those coal cars. Well, when Buck saw that, well, the buck stopped there. But I passed the buck. I went flying right by him, and when I did, that rope tied from his collar to my belt loop snapped tight one more time, and this time it just pulled my blue jeans right off me. When I hit the side of that train, I was screaming. Partly out of fear, mostly because, like I say, well, now I can't remember if I said it or not, but like I say, it was 14 degrees outside. And suddenly I wasn't wearing nothing but my boxer shorts. Now, because I was screaming, my tongue was sticking out of my mouth. And because my tongue was sticking out of my mouth, it was the first thing to hit the side of that train. Now, I don't know if you've ever touched your tongue to a piece of cold metal in the dead of winter before, but I suddenly found myself frozen solid to the side of that train. I had my feet under me. I was sort of running alongside the train like this, but it was cold, and I was barefoot. Pretty soon I lost my balance. And when I did, my feet sort of flew out behind me. My right arm was flapping in the wind. I had my left hand on my boxer shorts, but my mouth was wide open. That train was making about 20 miles an hour. The wind was blowing right in, taking all the saliva, washing it around my uvula, out my mouth, over my cheek, across my shoulder, and down my arm, until before I knew what was happening, there was a 50-foot wing of frozen drool sticking perpendicular from the right side of that train. Well, we topped a hill, started down. That train started going 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. And I guess the lift and the drag and the rest of that aeronautico mumbo jumbo must have been just right, because all of a sudden, that train lifted off. Now, if there had been anybody with me, they'd have certainly called us the Wrong Brothers. But now, I had never flown before, so I thought I'd see what I could do. And I took that train straight up, stalled out those engines, went into an inverted dive, pulled out of that into a loop-de-loo, and then I wrote my wife's name in the smoke real pretty, because I've always been romantic like that. But then I started to get just a little bit nervous, because I figured the FAA and the CSNX police were going to be wondering what I was doing flying that train around the sky. I mean, I didn't have a pilot's license. I didn't even have an engineer's license. I figured the smartest thing I could do would be to take that train back in. Well, I straightened her out, I reconnoitered the tracks beneath me, and I headed in. But I got about 5 feet above those tracks, I started to get nervous again. Because like I say, I'd never flown before. I'd certainly never landed a train before. And the one I was about to land only had one wing, and the one wing it did have was iced over. But I just started saying to myself, I think I can. I think I can. And I laid that train down just as pretty as you please. Well, right away I went to feeling proud. And I think you probably all know what the good book says about pride. Pride cometh before the fall. And folks, this is where the real trouble started. Because you see, I looked up just in time to see that train was going into a tunnel. And that tunnel was built just wide enough for that train. And I was sticking out just far enough to the right side that my head collided directly with the rock face of that mountain. Well, I came to a sudden and violent stop. That ice wing shattered off, but that train was still going, and my tongue was still frozen solid to the side of it. I could feel my tongue getting pulled further and further out of my mouth. I could see that train slowing down under the strain. And I knew one of two things was bound to happen. Either that train was going to stop, or my tongue was going to get jerked right out of my mouth. And that's when I said, something has got to give. Well, just then I heard a tremendous snap as my tongue, now stretched 40 feet long, tore itself free of the side of that train and came tearing down that tunnel like a giant rubber band bent for fury, and it just slingshotted me and it straight up into the sky. Well, by this time it was raining and snowing and sleeting pretty good, so it didn't take long for an 8-ton snowball to freeze solid on the tip of my 40-foot tongue. So there we were, the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, and me in my boxer shorts. I reckon we must have looked like a sucker on a stick flying through the sky. But pretty soon gravity caught up to us, and we started heading down. It was kind of like parachuting, but it was kind of like having a hippopotamus for your parachute. We were headed straight for the ground at a pretty good clip when I noticed some power lines beneath me. I managed to wiggle and twist myself just right. I dropped right in between those power lines, and just before I hit the ground, that 8-ton snowball on the tip of my 40-foot tongue hung up on those power lines and caught me. I was just sort of hanging there like, Little old Jaybird came and landed on my head. He and I were just looking around, waiting for someone to come and get me down, or spring to come and thaw out my tongue. Well, it was while I was looking around that I happened to notice a black bear coming out of his cave. Now, he was lean and hungry after a long winter's hibernation, and when he looked up and saw me in my boxer shorts and that jaybird on my head hanging from those power lines, well, that bear just smiled. Near as I can figure, He thought we were some sort of R-rated pinata sent straight from heaven. And that bear reached into the hollow of a tree and pulled out an aluminum ladder and a baseball bat. Yeah, that surprised me too. He set that ladder up underneath me and he commenced to climbing, and he did not stop until he got to that top step, that one that says, clear as day, do not stand here, you might lose your balance. He took that baseball bat, took a couple of practice swings, and just as he was coming around to deliver his death blow, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. Looked up just in time to see Buck Dog. Y'all remember Buck Dog from earlier in the story? Good. Buck Dog came charging out of the underbrush. Of course, on his short little legs, it's more like overbrush. And he quickly assessed the situation, and out of a deep sense of loyalty, Buck Dog bound up that ladder and he bit that bear right on the backside. Well, when Buck bit that bear, it knocked that bear off balance. He dropped that bat, started rocking back and forth on top of that ladder, and just before he fell, he grabbed a hold of my ankles. Now, when that bear grabbed hold of my ankles with Buck biting his behind and him on the aluminum ladder and me with the 40-foot tongue and the 8-ton snowball sitting on the power lines, well, that completed a 70,000-volt circuit that none of us had anticipated. A lightning bolt passed down my tongue, blew all the feathers off that jaybird, passed through me, blew the fur off that bear, blew the hair off Buck, and blew us all straight up into the sky one more time. So there we were. Let me recap for you just in case you missed anything. There's the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, that naked jaybird. I was now as naked as that jaybird. And then there was the buck-naked bear and the bear-naked buck. All of us streaking through the night sky like a comet. Well, eventually everything got back to normal. We landed, the snowball melted, my tongue shrank, the bird got his feathers back, I got some clothes back, the bear got his fur back, Buck got his hair back. And if there's anything at all I learned from this situation, and it seems like the sort of thing I should have learned something from, I guess maybe sometimes it is best to just let sleeping dogs lie.
Long after this festival ends, you'll be saying, Buck ain't no ordinary dog. Our next teller ain't no ordinary teller. Willie Claflin does it all. He is an award-winning author and musician. He is the enabler for Maynard Moose, the only quadruped on the storytelling circuit. Maynard, in fact, tells the stories of the Uglified Ducky, Rapunzel and the Seven Dwarfs, and the Billy Goat Graham. These are award-winning books for which Maynard graciously allows Willie to take credit. Willie sings traditional ballads from the British Isles and Appalachia, which are my personal favorites. He also sings blues and his own original tunes. He presents in his stories and sometimes in his music ways of looking at things that may seem absurd until he helps us realize that the way we view things may really be the absurdity. Willie has performed across the globe, including the International Storytelling Festival in Ireland. Don't you know that was fun? He is the recipient of the National Storytelling Network's Oracle Circle of Excellence. Please welcome Willie Claflin.
Hi, everybody. Willie here, still in San Francisco, wishing I were in Maine. I'll tell you a couple stories from the coast of Maine. A couple of stories that have moose in them, one by a moose. But first, this story from my friend Rob McCall. He's a naturalist and writer living in Blue Hill, Maine. He was the congregational minister there for many years, finally retired. And he has made over 1,000 trips up and down Blue Hill Mountain. Now, Blue Hill Mountain is the name of a hill mountain behind the town of Blue Hill. You got to be 1,000 feet tall to be a mountain. It's really only 990 feet tall, so that makes it a hill. But every once in a while, they go add a big pile of rocks to the top of the hill in order to make it a mountain. So it's Blue Hill Mountain. And my friend Rob keeps many of his writings in an almanac form. I loved the almanac growing up when I was a little kid. I liked the weather reports and the statistics and the little drawings and all the weather forecasts and the little random bits of information, who was born on this day in history. And Rob's almanac is called the Awanadjo Almanac. Awanadjo is the Algonquian word for Blue Hill. They call it Small Misty Mountain. And every week his almanac is published in the weekly packet, and it's broadcast on the radio as well. And eventually these almanacs individually get turned into books. Anyway, here's an almanac from right after Christmas, about 20 years ago. Rob says he was reading Black Elk, and he ran across a passage where Black Elk says, "You will notice that everything that the Indian does is done in a circle. That's because the way of the world is a circle, and all things move in circles and strive to be whole. The seasons in their great wheel of turning form a curve and come all the way back to where they began. And the sun is round and the moon is round, and I have heard that the earth is round and the stars are round. And even birds build their nests in circles, for their religion is the same as ours." Well, he was thinking about the world moving in circles. It was a cold morning, getting kind of chilly in the kitchen, and he needed to fill the big old wood stove there. It was getting down pretty low, so he went outside, grab an axe and chop up a log. And he realized when he grabbed the axe handle, it was so cold out there, he really needed some gloves. So he came back inside and fished for his gloves, which are in his coat pocket, hanging on the coat rack there by the door. But the weight of all the winter clothes and all the moisture they'd absorbed and everything, when he grabbed the gloves out of the pocket of the coat, the whole thing just fell to the floor. The rack fell off the wall, all the clothes in a big mess on the floor. Okay, so now he had to clean that up. That was okay. He put the clothes in a pile on the kitchen table and went to get a hammer and screwdriver to fix the rack. But when he went back to the drawer where they are always supposed to be, everyone puts them back, okay? They weren't there. Well, he went off looking for the miscreant who had made off with them, and then he came across his wife Rebecca in the hallway. She was hanging one of her beautiful landscape paintings using the screwdriver and the hammer. Well, he immediately took pity on her because he saw the picture hook she was using is small enough it wasn't really going to hold the picture. He said, "No, wait a minute, hon, let me get you a bigger picture hanger," because he knew there was one in his toolbox out in the back hallway. So he went out to his toolbox to get the big hook out of the box, but he could hardly even see his tool, but it was buried under Christmas wrappings and boxes and everything. He thought, well, I should get rid of this pile of trash. I'll too bad to let some of this wrapping paper go, but anyway, it's time. And so he bundled it all up and took it outside to throw it in the back of the pickup truck. But when he got to the pickup truck, there was this really nice rug, kind of a runner, that their neighbors had given them to use in the back hallway. So we thought, well, there's no point in throwing the trash in on top of the rug. I'll take the rug in first and I'll put the trash in the back of the truck. So he took the rug back into the hallway, just about to roll it out down the hallway, when he noticed that the hallway was just filthy. I don't know how long it had been since it was swept, a very long time. It was so dirty, he thought, there's no point in putting this nice rug down on top of filth. I'll clean out the hallway. That's what I'll do. So he went to get a broom to sweep out the hallway, but the phone rang. Well, it was a call for his son, Dan. It was kind of an important call, had something to do with an appointment that afternoon. And so he tried to look around for pencils, see if he could find a pencil, write the message down. But he couldn't find anything. He tried to memorize the message as best he could. And finally, when the guy at the other end hung up, he found a pencil, went to write it down. But just as soon as he went to write it down, the first word, the point, snapped off completely. So now he had to sharpen the pencil, right? So he went to the pencil sharpener to sharpen the pencil, but it was jammed up. Someone had stuck something in the pencil sharpener and it wouldn't even turn. He thought, well, I can whittle a point. So he went to get his knife, but his knife, I guess he hadn't sharpened it in ages. He hadn't realized how dull it was. He thought, well, there's no point in leaving a good tool in a state like this. I better sharpen it up. So he got out the steel and he whipped the blade across the steel, got it nice and sharp. And then he went to whittle the pencil. The message by this time kind of fading from his brain, but he thought he could remember most of it. And he realized, what am I doing? I'm whittling all over the floor. I'm making this big mess on the floor. What an oaf. So he went to get the dustpan and brushed them up through the remains there, the shavings, into the wood stove, because, conservation of energy. Throw it back on the wood stove. When he got to the wood stove and looked inside, he realized that it was just about completely out. It's harder to start a fire than to keep an old one going. So he thought, well, I better quickly go split some wood and throw it in here. So he went outside to split some wood, grabbed the axe, but the handle was so cold, his hands just about froze, and he thought, I really need a pair of gloves. Where did I put the gloves? And he said at that moment a great light dawned upon him. He was right back where he started. Like all things, like the wheel of seasons, like birds building their nests, he had just moved in a complete circle, and he had arrived back at where he began. I don't know the moral of that story. You'll have to draw your own. But it reminded me of a brief phone call with my cousin Martha. I'd had a hard day, hadn't gotten anywhere. He said, Willie, you should know by now, there's certain days when you know by 10 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't make any difference how hard you work. When the sun goes down, you're going to be exactly where you started. But I like the idea of moving in a circle instead of being stuck. In Maine, they call storytellers humorists. And there was a state treasure, the author of Bert and I, a whole series of recordings called Bert and I, Marshall Dodge. And he had a story about a moose. It was very short. The storytelling in Maine, as many of you know, is not quite the way it is elsewhere. It's almost hard to tell if it's a story. It's almost hard to tell when it's ended, if it's ended. And it's told very slowly, and there's certainly not an excess of emotional content. So here's this story called Albert Tyler's Moose. I'm going to tell it like he did. I told this before, some of you might have heard it. I'll probably tell it again. I ain't ashamed. I'm going to tell it to you right now. Albert Tyler was having a snooze on his front porch. All of a sudden he looked up. There's a moose nosing about in his carrots. Well, quick as a wink, he got his gun down off the wall and shot the moose in the leg just to wound him, you know. Well, he dragged that moose to the barn, bedded him down with some hay and water, after dressing the wound, of course. Next day, he paints the barn bright red. Big white lettering on the side. See the moose, 25 cents. Special family rate, 35 cents. Well, I swear, after a few days, that place looked more like a fair than it did a farm. Cars parked all along the road. This family come from Massachusetts. The man and his wife, the kids are there. He gave Albert his 35 cents. He says, I want to see the moose with my family. Albert says, no, I'm so sorry. I can't take your money, mister. The man says, well, what's the matter? I says there on the band, 35 cents. I paid you my 35 cents. Albert Tyler said, no, you see, I got to tell you, I had a good look at your family, and I got to say it's going to be worth an awful lot more, my moose, to see your family than it is for your family to see my moose. Well, story's ended, just in case you wondered. That's the end of Albert Tyler's moose. But we have all kinds of moose in Maine, as you know. Maynard is here somewhere. Maynard, here he is. We'll wake up and elevate the moose. This is Maynard Moose. As you may know, he is a pygmy moose from Aroostook County, and he is the keeper of the flame. He is the moose of his generation who gets to treasure and tell the old mother moose stories handed down so long ago. Hi, Maynard. Where are they? You mean the people in the audience? Mm-hmm. I just see a screen. Well, they're on the other. It's hard to explain. They can see me. They can. Okay, everybody, it's nice. I can't say it's nice to see you because I can't see you, but it's nice you to see me. I'm very pleased to be speaking at you. And I would like to tell you an annual fable. We can learn a lot from human behaviors by listening to animal fables. And maybe we can learn to derange our priorities in a more significant fashion. This is called The Lion and the Mousey. In the jungle, in the mighty jungle, the lion was sleeping one night, dreaming his favorite dream, that he was an all-zebra, all-you-can-eat buffet. But just as he had got to the zebra pudding in his dream, what should happen but a little mouse run by, tickle his whiskers, and wake him up. "Rah!" said the lion, and he pounced upon the poor little mousey. "You have wrecked my dream, I'm going to eat you." "Oh, no, no, please, sir," said the mouse. "I know I am just a little mousey. I know I am a little mousey, but sometimes if you spare my life, maybe someday I could rescue you." "That's ridiculous," said the lion. "You are just a little wee, cowering, timorous beastie. How could a wee, cowering, timorous beastie like you save someone mighty like me, the king of the jungle?" "Nevertheless," said the little mouse, "it has been well noted that sometimes the weak and insignificant can help out the powerful in their hour of need." Well, the lion, he's sick and tired of this. He wants to get back to sleep. "Oh, whatever," said the lion. "Go away. Don't bother me again." And they both would have completely forgotten about this chance encounter, except 2 weeks later, the lion was wandering through the forest, pondering to himself how best to rule over his ethnically diverse community, when he stepped into a rope trap, sproing, and was caught fast. And the more he yell and rage and roar and tear and snarl, the tighter and tighter and tighter the rope held him. He began to use inappropriate language. And the roaring and the inappropriate language reached the ears of a little mousey who was scuttling by. "Hey, hey," said the mousey, "what's wrong?" "And the king of beasts let loose with an extremely offensive oath." Now, said the mousey, "there is no reason for inappropriateness. Just relax. I will save you. Relax, take a deep breath. Let us calmly assess the situation." Now let's see. I see the problem. Your great teeth, which are very good at rending helpless herbivores, are absolutely useless when it comes to solving a problem like this. But I, with my little mousy teeth, can probably nibble right through and set you free. So hold still, try to control your emotions, and breathe slowly. Well, the lion settled down, and the little mousy start to nibble. Nibble, 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 and one strand of rope goes sprawling, and nibble, 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 and another strand of rope goes sprawling, and before you knew it, sprawling, the lion is free. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," said the lion. "Oh, how can I repay you?" "Never mind payment," said the mousey. "I just hope you have learned your lesson." "You hope I have what?" "Learned your lesson." "No, but what do you mean, learned my lesson?" "Well, you think that you are the king of beasties, and I am just a wee, cowering, timorous mousey. But we have seen that I am really vastly superior, because in the first place, I did not use inappropriate language. No, so I am morally and ethically superior. Next, we can see I'm emotionally superior because I did not freak out. I calmly assessed the situation. And next, I was intellectually superior. You could not figure out how to get out. But I, in my mousy brain, figured it out in a trice. So we see already that emotionally, ethically, psychologically, intellectually, I was superior to you, so-called king of beasts. And finally, if I may say so, I was physically superior too. Your teeth were useless in setting you free, but my powerful mousy teeth gnawed the rope and set you free. So we can go down the checklist. You can see for yourself how I am superior. Morally, ethically, psychologically, physically. Well, the lion hath heard just about enough. He pick up the mouth by the tail and swallow her in one bite. And the moral of the story, pay attention, this is why we tell you stories for morals to rearrange your priorities. The moral of the story is, if you are superior in every way, it is not a good idea to tell the king. Okay? Well, thank you very much, Maynard. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. And we really hope to see you in 3D life someday soon. Mm-hmm. Also in person. Yes, in person.
Thank you, Willie and Maynard. You see, storytelling provides something for everybody. Our evening continues with Charlotte Blake Alston, who comes to us from Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. She is a storyteller, a narrator, a musician, and a librettist. I had to look that one up to be sure. That is someone who writes the text for an opera or other long vocal work. Wow. She also possesses a rich, lovely voice, both speaking and singing. Charlotte tells stories from generations past as well as contemporary ones. Her specialties are those from the African and American oral cultural traditions. Her performances are often accompanied by ancestral African instruments, such as the 21-stringed kora. She is the first storyteller to perform with the Philadelphia Orchestra on both their family and student concert series. She has also been the narrator for several other nationally known orchestras and symphonies. Charlotte is featured at national and regional festivals, schools, universities, libraries, and performing arts centers throughout the United States and Canada, as well as local and national radio and TV shows. Please welcome Charlotte Blake Alston.
Galgangirabi, Galgangirabi, Dinet Subateli Nandem Senegal, Giran Randando, Elet Subateli Nandem Senegal. Those words are from a language called Wolof, and Wolof is one of many different languages that is spoken in the country of Senegal. Senegal is one of 54 different countries on that huge continent called Africa. And if you look at a map of that huge continent and you look on the left side is the west side, you will see the country of Senegal right along the Atlantic Ocean. I live on the east coast of the United States, so I'm on one side of the Atlantic Ocean. Senegal is on the other side. The largest city in the country of Senegal is Dakar. And off the coast of Dakar, out further in the water, is a small island called Gorée. The only way to get from Dakar to Gorée, from Gorée to Dakar, is to take a boat. And it's often called a chaloupe. So people talk about taking chaloupe to Gorée. That song sings about how happy people are when they have their turn, have a chance to get on the boat and go over from Gorée to Senegal to Dakar, to go to the marketplace and see their friends they haven't seen in a while, and then take the boat back. They look forward to that time. So it's a joyful song. The story that I'm going to share with you also has two songs in it that are sung in the language of Wolof. So when I begin to sing, you won't know what I'm saying, but I will tell you what the words mean. Before I tell my story, would you like to practice saying some words in Wolof? Okay, that would be wonderful. We're going to do some greetings, and if you ever get to Senegal, you will know how to greet someone in their own language, and it makes them feel so good. So here in America, we see our friends, we see our neighbors, our schoolmates. We go, hey, what's up? How you doing? See you later. Well, in many places in the world, they take a little bit more time with their greetings. Now, when it is healthy to do so, normally they would be shaking hands. You look the person in the face, you look them in the eye, and you would say, Nagadef, which means, how are you, for the most part. And then if someone asks you that, you say, Mangifirek, I am here only. Rek means only. Anything else happiness, sadness, sickness, health, that is up to God. But I am here, and that is where we begin every day. You ask how their family is. You say, Anawakarga. And if someone asks you that, you say, Nugaforik. They are here only. Anything else is up to God. We are here. Then you ask if they are in peace. You say, Jamgaam. And if someone asks you that, you say, Jamrek. I am in peace only. And they will say, oh, Alhamdulillah, praise God. So let's practice those. So when you greet someone, you say, Nangadef. Na. Nga. Def. Nangadef. How are you? Someone asks you that. You say, Mangifirek. Ma. Ngi. Fi. Rek. Mangifirek. You ask how someone's family is. Ana wakarga? Ana. Wa. Ke. Ga. Ana wakarga? Someone asks you that. You say, Nu gaforek. Nu. Gafu. Rek. Then you ask if they are in peace. Jam gaam? Jam. Gaam. And the reply is Jamrek. And then you say, praise God. Very good. You can practice those terms. You can play this tape over again. And you can practice those words again. Well, this story has a little girl in it who was in almost a similar situation that we are, even though this story happened a long time ago, far across the ocean. A sickness comes into her village, and unlike what is happening now, she could not remain in her village. She had to leave it or she would get sick. And this was at a time when people lived in villages that were very far apart from each other. They had to walk long distances to get from one to the other. In our case right now, staying close to our homes is what will help to keep us healthy. So it's a little bit different in this story. There was once a little girl named Aniko. She lived in a village with her mother, her father, her sisters, her brothers, her classmates, her friends, very happily until one day a sickness came into her village, and one by one, people began to get sick and not get better. Men, women, the old ones, children, even babies. Well, it spread through that village like an angry fire, and no one seemed to be spared except Aniko. Well, this made her really sad, but she knew that she could not remain there because she would become sick herself. So sadly, she left her village and began walking away, and for a long time, she walked backwards, keeping that village in her sight. And she walked that way until soon it disappeared from her eyes. And then she turned and she walked and walked until she found herself standing at the edge of a thick, thick forest. Now, she had heard stories about this forest, stories of people who had gone into it, but had never come back out. But she had also heard stories of a village on the other side of the forest where, just as in Aniko's village, a stranger would be welcomed in. But she would have to enter that thick forest in order to find the path that would lead her to that village. Well, Aniko uttered a silent prayer, and then she entered the thick forest. She walked and walked, pushing aside wide leaves and long vines. She grew tired, but she continued on. Her prayers were answered that day, and she came to the path that would lead her to that village, and she followed that path to the other side of the forest. What a beautiful country this is, she thought as she walked. Well, soon the village came into her sight, and all of the villagers came out to greet her, and it was then that Aniko noticed that these villagers had one rather unique characteristic. They all had long, high necks. with heads that sat way at the top of their necks. Even the babies on their backs had little long necks with little heads at the top. Well, Aniko had never seen anything like this before. That was not part of the stories that she had heard. But one of them asked, what a little girl like Aniko would be doing in that forest alone? And how did you get such a short neck? Well, they had never seen such a sight either. But Aniko told them what had happened to her and her village. And there was something about Aniko that made the Longnecks trust her, so they invited her to stay. And they were right. Aniko was warm and caring and respectful. She worked, she danced, she played with the villagers. She accompanied the Longnecks to the marketplaces and shared in their celebrations and in their sorrows. But the thing that was most special about Aniko was that every morning, very early, Aniko would rise and cross the village singing. Yesinale, yesinale, yen, yawanama deman, te yesinale nitam, yawu jana, yesinale, yesinale, yen, which meant, I'm coming to wake you up. I'm up, a new day has begun. I'm coming to wake you also, people. Well, singing was very much a part of Aniko's life in her old village. But unbelievable as it might sound, the Longnecks had never heard singing before. They thought this was a wonderful way to be awakened from their sleep, and they would lie in their beds and not get up and go about their work until they heard Aniko's song, and they loved her even more because of this special gift she brought to them. But in this same village, as in all villages in the world, there was one evil, jealous, small-hearted man. He didn't like Aniko from the first day he saw her because she was different. And he called to her one day while she was working and said, You do not belong here. You are different from us. You have a short neck. Differences can only lead to problems in this village, so you should take yourself away to avoid bringing trouble here. Well, those words stung Aniko's heart. And without thinking, she just ran off. And after a time, she found herself in the middle of that thick forest. Well, it had been the rainy season, so the vines hung longer. The foliage grew thicker. She could not even see where she was stepping after a while, so she sat in the place where she was. Night came quickly. Well, early the next morning, all the Longnecks lay in their sleeping places waiting to hear Aniko's song. But there was only silence. One by one, they began to rise and greet one another and ask, Where's Aniko? Have you seen Aniko? Well, they gathered in the center of the village, and one of the elders said, I think I know who might know something. Follow me. And he led them to the home of that evil, jealous, small-hearted man who told them, almost with pride, how he had spared the village of problems because Aniko was different. Well, the villagers were furious. But now they had to think of a way to help Aniko find her way back. They could not go into the forest because they would become lost themselves. Well, it was one small child who had an idea. She said, maybe we can sing as Aniko has sung to us. Maybe she will hear our voices and that will help her find her way back. Well, not only had the Longnecks never heard singing before, they had never tried singing themselves. But they agreed that it was important to try. So they decided they would sing Aniko's name and sing that they were sad that she was gone and they wanted her back. So they all stood side by side in the center of the village, and they began to sing for the very first time. Nisawani Aniko Whoa, shika na na na. Whoa, shika na na na. Hey ho, vicini. Hey ho, vicini. Anikoni sawani, anikoni sawani. Whoa, shika na na na. Whoa, shika na na na. Hey ho, vicini. Hey ho, vicini. Hey ho, vicini. Hey ho, vicini. Well, they sang and sang and chanted, and the sound of their voices traveled into the forest and reached the place where Aniko was. She heard that singing, and she knew it was the long necks trying to help her find her way back. She followed the sound of those voices, and they led her to that path that took her into the village once again. Well, the villagers rejoiced when they saw that she was safe and back with them, and they invited her to stay with them as long as she wished. And the chief of that village said to Aniko, to the villagers, and to that evil, jealous, small-hearted man, "It is not the length of your neck that is important. It is the goodness of your heart." And so it remains today, I believe. It doesn't matter whether you're a boy or girl or black or white or young or old. It is who you are inside and what you give to the world. Now, as we traveled to different places with the students when we were in Senegal, often people gave us gifts. That story was given to me as a gift. Sometimes we would arrive and they would get out their drums and begin to sing songs as their gift, or they would do a dance as a gift. We thought about that. It took us a little bit, maybe a little over a week, and we thought, you know what? We can do the same thing. So we started creating songs and creating little dances and doing little things that we could share as a gift that you didn't even have to unwrap and that could stay in your heart and your mind for a long time. I was reminded of that story last month when I took a walk. I got about 15 minutes into my walk and I approached a location where there was a sign on the grassy part of the sidewalk, and it said, "Free jokes." As I walked past the sign, I came to a house where there was another sign on the steps, "Free jokes." Behind the sign was a little boy who looked to be about 7, maybe 8 years old. And he called out, "Miss, would you like a free joke?" Who wouldn't want a free joke? Don't have to pay for it? Sure. So I stood on the sidewalk with my mask. He stood up on his step. His mom had his joke book, and he gave me 2 jokes for the price of none. After that, I shared a joke with him. And after that, I saw that his mom put an announcement in our neighborhood Facebook page that he would be at the entrance of one of our parks 2 nights a week giving free jokes. In the middle of this time when we have to stay close to home, can't go to school, many of us are not in our churches, we're not hugging one another, this one little boy thought, what can I do to lift my neighbor's spirits? And he came up with the idea of giving out free jokes. It lifted my spirit that day because I didn't have a good morning. Would you like to hear the jokes that I got for free? Okay. The first one was, what do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. What did the why was the math book so sad? Because it had a lot of problems. So I decided to share a joke with him too. And this is my joke. How do you catch a unique rabbit? Unique up on it. How do you catch a tame rabbit? The tame way. Maybe you can find a way to lift your community spirits, your family spirits, right where you are.
That was just wonderful. Well, we're up to the final performance for the evening, but there is no program that would be complete, at least in Midland, Texas, without Donald Davis. I have heard it said that Donald Davis is a storyteller's storyteller. Hailing from Ocracoke, North Carolina, Donald grew up hearing the traditional tales of the Scots-Irish that his family brought from the British Isles. His grandparents on both sides of the family were pioneers in the area of Appalachia that now backs up on the Smoky Mountain National Park. His favorite stories to hear, however, and now to tell, are those that come from the heritage of those relatives, stories that deal with people facing problems, large and small, with ingenuity, strength, and dignity. They are a rich blend of humor, wisdom, and perhaps a poignancy which allows us to remember our own stories. Donald is a recipient of the National Storytelling National Circle of Excellence and Lifetime Achievement Awards. He is a prolific author and has over 40 recordings. He is a regular performer at the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and has performed at the Midland Storytelling since its beginning. Welcome, Donald Davis.
I'm Donald Davis. When my father was 19 years old, his father died. And you know what he inherited? 5 little brothers and sisters to raise who now had no father. So by the time he and my mother had me and my little brother Joe, he was already well practiced at child rearing, and his methods of punishment were perfected. You see, if we committed what he considered to be a misdemeanor, there might be a little brief spanking that didn't amount to much and it was forgotten in 20 minutes. But if we committed what he labeled as a felony, he would act like he didn't know about it. And we would start to worry. Does he know or not? Is he going to say anything about it or not? When's he going to say something about it? Is he waiting to kill us when Mama's not watching? And then finally enough time would pass that we would decide, oh, I think he really doesn't know about it. And then about the time we would decide that, we would hear these awful words. Boys, let me tell you a little story. Oh, no, not a story. No, don't. Just spank me. Don't tell me a story. A story takes an hour and you can't forget it. Let me tell you about one of those times. My mother had left me at the bank where my daddy worked one afternoon. She had gone to the beauty parlor and didn't want me tagging along. And so I was there to go home with my dad. It was his day to lock up at the bank. Everybody else had gone. We checked to be sure the back door was closed and locked. We checked to be sure all the windows were closed and locked. But the last thing he always had to do was he had to wind the time clocks in the back of the big Mosler vault door so that even if somebody knew the combination, the vault would not unlock till 8:30 the next morning. And while he was doing that, it gave me time. I was 8 years old. It gave me time for my favorite hobby, snooping and prowling around. I was snooping around the desk that belonged to a man named Mr. Jack Way. On that desk, he always had a big fish bowl full of candy and chewing gum. I didn't mess with it. Nope, because that day there was something more interesting than candy and chewing gum on that desk. That day there was a half-empty pack of Cavalier cigarettes. I didn't do it. No, when you're 8 years old, you are not responsible for what your hands do. You wake up in the morning and you just say, where are you going to go today? And you follow them around because you can't get loose from them, can you? I know people like that have hands like that their whole lives. Well, one of my hands picked up those cigarettes, shook one of them out. The other hand picked it up, put that cigarette in my pocket, and I had no way to get it out of there. And about then, my daddy was finished, and we got in the car and went home. As soon as we got home, I got my little brother Joe. I says, "Come on, let's go out to the barn loft. I got something to show you. Come on, let's go, let's go." And we went sneaking out of the house. We went down through the pasture. We went in through the feed room of the barn. We went up in the barn loft, and I pulled out the cigarette. I said, "Look what I got." And I stuck it in my mouth, and I started talking with that cigarette popping up and down in my mouth like Humphrey Bogart in an old black and white movie. From here on, everything in this story is my little brother Joe's fault. Because he said, "Smoke it, smoke it, smoke it." I had no idea how to smoke it. I didn't know whether to suck in or blow out. But by now I was showing off, so I couldn't quit. I had matches. I always carried matches because 8 years old, you might need matches. So I pulled out those matches, and just as I struck a match, we heard my daddy come into the barn to milk our cow, Helen. We could always hear him coming because he sang on his way to the barn, and he sang while he milked, because he told us that Helen was a religious cow, and if you sang hymns to her while you got ready and while you milked, she'd give more milk and she'd give it more easily. So here he came. He was singing at the top of his voice, "For his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." My little brother Joe said, "Hide it, hide it, hide it." I was way ahead of him. I blew out the match. I took that cigarette and wadded it up, looked around for a hiding place, and I stuffed it down in a crack between two boards in the floor of that old barn loft. I thought the crack was solid, but I didn't know it went all the way through. And just as my dad walked under the edge of the barn to milk, the cigarette, the hay trash, and the dust that I'd pushed through that crack came down through the air right in front of him. It probably even hit him as he walked through it. But he must have gone blind because he didn't see it. I figured he just came in out of the sunshine. His eyes hadn't adjusted yet. He doesn't know what happened. But my little brother and I held our breath. We didn't make a sound. We tried to hold our heartbeats while we looked down through that now open crack and watched him milk our cow. He was so slow milking that night. I thought he'd never get through. He got out his little stool. He washed off her udder. He started off, he was slow, big, long, slow squirts. I kept thinking, hurry up, get it done. Go on so we can get out. Finally, he finished. My brother Joe and I came down the steps, and we went a long way back to the house. We went way out to the creek, went up by the creek, went around the chicken house, went through part of the garden. We came in the door on the other side of the house, and Mama said, I was about to call you boys. Our supper's ready. And we sat down to have supper. Not a word was said. We ate supper just like always. My daddy never even mentioned going to milk. He never asked any questions about what we've been doing, about where we've been. Supper was all finished, and I thought, well, he doesn't know. We got away with it. And then my mother said, boys, it's a school night. I think we better go on to bed. And my little brother said, I don't want to go to bed. I'm not tired. I don't get tired. And then my daddy looked at my little brother and said, well, Joe, if you don't get tired, I bet Donald's not tired either. And if you boys don't want to go to bed quite yet, how about if I tell you a little story? No. My mother said, well, it can't be a very long story because it's a school night. He said, it won't be long. It'll be just right. She said, well, what are you going to tell about? He was always telling us stories about things that he and his brothers had done when they were little growing up on the farm. He said, well, let's see. Have I ever told you about the time that Frank and Harry burned little Joe Medford's barn down? My mama said, I don't think I've ever heard that story. My dad said, it's a good story. I believe I'll tell it right now. He said, I guess that Harry and Frank were probably about as old as Donald and Joe are now. You know, Daddy was running for the legislature, and one Sunday afternoon, some man came all the way out to the farm, drove an old Model T Ford out there, all the way out to the farm to talk politics with Daddy. They sat in the kitchen at the table and they talked all afternoon. And when that man finally left, he left about a half-empty pack of Camel cigarettes on our kitchen table. Mom and Daddy didn't ever see him. No, they never did see him because Frank and Harry went in there to get a drink of water, and they saw those cigarettes, and they got them. And they went outside and started looking for a place where they could try out and see if they could smoke a cigarette. They talked about hiding up in our barn loft. But when they thought about it, they were afraid maybe if they did that Daddy would go to milk and catch them. So they decided not to go up in our barn loft. Nope, they went up the hill behind the house. They went through the fence. They went down the other side of the hill, and they climbed up in little Joe Medford's barn loft. And they got out some matches, and they managed to light up one of those cigarettes, and they were passing it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They were smoking it, boys. Well, they hadn't thought about this. All of a sudden, here came little Joe coming from his house out toward the barn to milk. All of a sudden, Frank said to Harry, hide it, hide it, hide it. And Harry, who was puffing on that cigarette, he took it out, he squashed it, and he put that cigarette down in a crack between two boards in the floor of that old barn loft. And those boys jumped out the back, and they ran up the hill, through the fence, across the hill, back home. Little Joe saw them run off. He knew who they were. He knew they were all over the place all the time. He had no idea what they were doing there. Well, he went on, and he milked his cow, and he got finished, and he went back to the house, and he went to bed, and he went to sleep. Well, by then, I guess Frank and Harry had gone to bed and gone to sleep too. It's time for everybody to be asleep. Boys, way in the night, they hadn't gotten that cigarette put all the way out. And stuffed down in that crack between those boards, it caught the breeze. And the dust caught fire. And the hay trash caught fire. And those old dried out wooden boards, that barn must have been 60 years old, they caught fire. Oh, boys, it's a good thing it wasn't the wintertime and there were no cows locked up in there for the night. Because you see, since everybody was asleep, nobody knew the barn was on fire till it came through the roof, and then it was too late. And boys, that barn burned to the ground. Well, remember little Joe had seen those boys run off, and he got together with Daddy. Daddy got together with Frank and Harry, and they had prayer meeting. And by the time it was all over, the whole story came out. And do you know what? Our Daddy had to build little Joe a new barn, and our Daddy had to pay for it. He said, boys, what do you think of that story? My little brother said, can we go to bed now? I just got real tired. And we looked at our mama. She had no idea. She has to this day no idea why he told us that story. But we knew that he knew, and he had given us one chance. But do you think we might get another one? You know, that story happened over 110 years ago. And you know who's heard it by now? My children, my grandchildren. The story doesn't get forgotten. So here's the lesson, folks, parents and grandparents. If something happens that leads you to need to punish one of your children or grandchildren, if they have committed a misdemeanor, just get a big stick and just wear the life out of them. But if they've committed a felony, tell them a story. It'll keep them in therapy for the rest of their lives, and they'll never forget it.
What an amazing night. When these stories end, that's where you began, telling and retelling what you enjoyed, and then sharing stories of your own. We'd love for you to follow the festival on Facebook, and when you comment, use the hashtag MSF2020. And you can go to our website at midlandstorytellingfestival.org and find links to all these tellers' websites so you can purchase merchandise and support them. Remember Christmas gifts. It's been a pleasure to be with you tonight. We thank the board for the Midland Storytelling Festival, and Sue Roseberry, we could not do this without you. And of course, all of our sponsors for making this possible. Let me share the names of some of the key sponsors who make our dreams of storytelling a reality. The FMH Foundation, the Abel Hanger Foundation, the Morrow Foundation, the City of Midland, Friends of Libraries and Literacy, West Texas National Bank, Ray Charitable Trust, and Basin PBS. It's possible for you to donate, volunteer, be a part of the festival too. Just go to the Midland Storytelling Festival website for all the details. We invite you to watch the encore performances of the entire festival via the Midland Storytelling Festival YouTube channel all the way through December 27th. Then, mark your calendars for the first weekend in December 2021 and plan to join us as we do this for the 30th time. Good night and good telling.